Our scripture today comes from the Psalter, the Psalms, and we'll be reading from Psalm 1, verses 1 through 3. Listen so that you may hear God's word for you this morning. Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or take the path that sinners tread, or sit at the seat of scoffers, but their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law they meditate day and night. They are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in its season, and their leaves do not wither. In all that they do, they prosper. May we share a word of prayer together. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable and pleasing to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Some of you may know that for a period of my life, I lived almost 8 years in the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And there was a lot of things I loved about being in that city. I loved the weather. It was probably the easiest weather job anybody had for the news ever. I mean, 99% of the time, a weather person, well, it's going to be sunny and clear today, which was most days in Albuquerque. You had very few days that were not sunny and clear. I loved the food. I loved the mountains. I loved the mix of cultures. There's so much I loved about the city. But when I got there, people said, you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. Because for the most part, New Mexico is, at least the southern half and parts of it, are brown. You kind of get to the north part of the state, it's kind of green, but for the most part, it's considered a brown state. And some people didn't like all the brown, not having much green. But if you look closely, you found green, but you just had to look in the right places. If you took an airplane and you flew over the city of Albuquerque, it would be brown except for one place. There was the Rio Grande River that flowed north and south on the west side of the city. And when you flew over, you saw this green band go right through the middle of the city along the Rio Grande with all the plants and foliage that would be along that river that would follow along there. So it was brown everywhere except for the Rio Grande. It was this green kind of life source to everything that was there. And you can imagine the trees and things that were close to that riverbed thrived, and the plants that were elsewhere struggled a little bit unless they were native plants to that area and learned how to survive on a limited amount of water. And so that's really important when you think about what we plant and where it goes and what its water source will be. I mean, we've been working a little bit on that with our own church property. Over the last year, we've been experimenting with some prairie grasses. We have a little bit in the front, and back on the berm on this back side, you can see all these prairie grasses that are growing that have come up, and we've kind of nurtured over the last year. And we did that. One is it helps save and preserve water, but it also allows natural plants to grow in their natural habitats versus bringing in, oh, I like this thing and I like this thing, and bringing these things in, and it may not be good fits for the climate or the space or the amount of water we're able to provide to those things. And so what we put where it's supposed to go makes a huge difference. The kinds of things and where they're planted makes a difference. When I think about that Albuquerque band of river, there was one thing I loved about being along that river was, one, it was a walking trail, and you had trails on either side of the river, and you could walk and bike and all kinds of things there. They were smart enough to put the nature center close to the river along the east side of the river, and you could go to the nature center, and all those things got fed by the water that was there by the Rio Grande. It was kind of a cool place because not only did you get to be experienced with nature and be reminded of the gift of what nature has for us, we can sometimes get too commercialized with our buildings and our cement and fences, and just to be out in nature is such a huge gift to us, and to be close to that water source, to walk along that river, reminded us of that gift that nature is to us. And there was all kinds of conversations that happened along the river. People walking and hiking, and they'd come across and have conversation. And it was just a life-giving place along the river. People loved to park. There were several parking places up and down the river for people to hike and be outside and enjoy company with one another. As I think about that symbol of the river, and it's also found in our psalm text, is this metaphor that it has for our own sense of life and faith and what nurtures us, what gives us strength and courage and sustenance for our life. I mean, think about all those things that are important to us. When we walk through the doors of this sanctuary on a Sunday morning, We cross through a threshold. We cross through that doorway. When we come through that doorway, we might come with certain assumptions about what might happen in this room when we get in here. Will people know me? Will people greet me? Will I get to see the people I'm anxious to see? There's a big part of people when we enter the space. Or maybe it's when we open the bulletin, has Chris done anything weird to the order of service today? And thank goodness that the order of worship is not with every week. We don't have a little bucket of little pieces of paper with the different pieces of worship. Well, this is going to be first and this is going to be second. And you have a sense of trust when you come in here that there's a liturgy, a kind of a flow to the service that gives us a sense of comfort and encouragement that allows us to travel in our minds, to think about the things we need to think about. Maybe it's during a hymn or during a prayer, or a moment of silence, or during the sermon, or coming forward for communion, or the act of offering and giving, where you look up and see the beautiful banners, and you see the colors, and you see the light beams, and all the things in here, the liturgy and the space create an opportunity for us to think more deeply about our life. Liturgy is important. The flow of what we do in a service makes sense. To not put the sermon up front and the welcome at the back. I mean, there's certain things that go where they're supposed to go in the service to create comfort, but also to create movement and a sense of introspection and discernment about our life in some way. For centuries in the Christian faith, putting together a liturgy and order of worship has helped curate depth for people. And so liturgy is important. There's an author that's written a book called The Magic of Ritual. The actual ritual itself, how important it is to have that ritual of sustenance of faith formation in our life. And I would say ritual is a little bit different than tradition. Sometimes traditions are good things, but sometimes traditions can prevent us from getting to new places in our life. We've always done it this way. It can't ever change. But liturgies and rituals can morph and change because a community morphs and changes over time somewhat. So we want those liturgies to be consistent, but also informative and adaptive to who we are as a community. I think we enter this space and we see a light that's lit in the center candle that's a reminder to us about something bigger than ourselves. Our culture teaches us I should be able to fix it myself, do it myself, and figure it out myself in some way. We have self-help books. This is one, a big section in the bookstore is self-help. I can do it myself. It's interesting how our culture is designed where it's just be me and all figured out. You are second place to my own needs. When we come into the space and we see a candle that represents God's presence, we're reminded that my life is dependent upon something bigger than me. And we have lights on the corners. And so when we come forward for communion, sometimes when people will light a candle when they come in, sometimes they'll light a candle as they exit, or they're leaving from a communion station and light a candle. And those candles are prayers, a reliance on a God that can help us, whatever our petition, our hope, our desire might be. A light might be a person. A light might be a remembrance. A light might be a hope. And these lights that we light in this space are significant symbols that shape how we think, how we believe, and how we understand one another. And then we can't give up the people. I mentioned people earlier, how important people are. And there's lots of people that say, well, I can have a faith at home. I can do it all by myself. I can pray to God. I can walk out in nature. But there's something that doesn't replace being together in community. There's something that happens when we're all together in the space that creates an energy and a space that we would not have otherwise when we're just on our own. Some of these are some of the guideposts that shape who we are and what's important to us in life. Now, the psalm that was written today, most psalms, out of the 150 psalms we have in the Psalter, 2/3 of them are laments. Sadness for a personal sadness, a communal sadness, whatever it might be. But Psalm 1 fits into a little bit different category. It's part of the Psalter that's called wisdom psalms. And somehow there's built within the psalm some sense of wisdom that's meant to be for the community of faith to say, we need this in our life. And the psalm has this imagery of those that are happy or those that are blessed, or those that have depth in their life. We can translate happy in a lot of different ways. But those that have depth and purpose and meaning, those are the people that plant themselves like a tree next to the source of water. The closer you are to the water, the closer you are to the source, the closer you are to being fed and nurtured on a regular basis. How important it is where we plant ourselves around the guideposts and the rituals that shape our life and we want to have shape our life. I mentioned Albuquerque in the beginning of the sermon. One of the things we did out there, we hiked a lot. There's a lot of hiking that goes on. And one of the infamous trails in Albuquerque is called the La Luz Trail. It's from the base of the Sandia Mountains to the top of the Sandia Mountain. The base of the Sandia Mountains is about 6,500 feet above elevation. The top is between 10 and 11,000 feet. And so it's a 4-mile hike from the base to the top. So you're basically 1,000 feet per mile to get up 4 miles up, and then you do 4 miles back down to get to your car. Otherwise, you're somewhere you can't get anywhere. And as I was making the switchbacks and going back, we had a group of us hiking together. We were going through all the travails. About every 50 feet was this sign that said, "Do not walk off the trail." I mean, it's like reminder every 50 feet, do not get off the trail, do not get off the trail. I'm going, okay, I won't get off the trail. I get to the top and I ask one of the rangers, I said, why do you have to have a sign like every 50 feet? He said, we cannot tell you how many people get off the trail. And when they get off the trail, they often injure themselves because the terrain is not set up for walking. So they'll sprain an ankle or they'll break a leg or they'll do something and we have to go up and retrieve them. Or even worse, as it gets darker, how many people we get called on that are lost. And you think, why would you go that far off the trail in the first place that you would get lost? But people would injure themselves and get lost. So they said, we have to post sign after sign after sign, do not get off the trail. And so, if we think about our life, more times than not, we get off the trail more than we really care to admit in our life. And so we need reminders for ourselves of the things that keep us grounded. And I mentioned some of those things. Lights, rituals, people, acknowledgement that it's not about me. One of the things I love about this passage in Psalm 1 is it has water images. One of the favorite images for me in Scripture is water images. And when I hear images of water, things that harken back to me is my own reflections about my baptism. And baptism is an important ritual in the life of the Christian faith. It's something we've done really since early on in the movement of Jesus and beyond is the role of baptism. The interesting thing is that Psalm 1 talks about water being the source of those that are trees planted near it. So it's a source of energy. It's a source of nurturing. It's a source of sustenance. It's a source of thriving. When I think about baptism, oftentimes I think we have maybe misunderstood maybe what the real ritual of baptism was intended for. Now, some of the classical ways we've understood baptism is we have a baptism experience to get somewhere else. I get baptized to become a member. I get baptized to take communion. I get baptized to get saved, or some of the languages that are used around baptism. But if we go back even earlier than how Christians began to form the understanding of baptism, because I think about Jesus' baptism. It's referenced in almost all the Gospels, this baptism experience. And Jesus goes down the River Jordan. You may recall the story. John the Baptist is there baptizing people, and Jesus says, John, I want you to baptize me. And John says, well, I'm not going to baptize you. You need to baptize me. And they have this little argument. Jesus ends up winning. John baptizes Jesus. It all works out the way Jesus had intended. And when Jesus was baptized, his goal was not to become a member. His goal was not to take communion. His goal was not to be saved. So what was the purpose of Jesus getting baptized in the first place? Jürgen Moltmann, German theologian, said, the roots of baptism is vocation, calling, purpose, intention with our life. As soon as Jesus is baptized, maybe he has a little temptation period, but after that, Jesus forges forward with this ministry that is life-giving for so many people. He's not worried about all these, I got baptized to do this, and I got baptized. He basically got baptized that ushered in this whole life that he brought to other people. He taught people and welcomed people and included people. He embodied the beloved community. He embodied on earth what heaven's supposed to be like. He tried to embody the very definition of unconditional love to everyone he encountered, to everyone he met. This idea of baptism for him was a vocational moment for him. It was not like, well, I got baptized, what's next? His baptism became this life-giving daily reminder of what his life was supposed to be like. There is an author that speaks about the liturgy and theology of baptism. I love this phrase. It says, when you are baptized, it's the phrase, become who you are in Jesus Christ. Become who you are. That's just a cool phrase. We're already it. Become what you already are. What God created you to be on this planet. It's just an awesome way to think about the nature of baptism. There was a sermon I did once called Walking with Wet Footprints. And the sermon essentially was about the role of baptism. And when we get baptized, when you come out of a baptismal font, I had the joy of being fully immersed from head to toe baptism. Not everybody had that experience. Some were infants, some were children, some were youth, some adults, various baptismal experiences. As a youth, I was fully submerged in the water, came out of the water, and had to walk a little distance, and I could look back and see wet footprints from the baptismal fonts up to my body. And at some point, if I kept walking, the footprints would kind of dissipate. I went from full wet footprints to partial wet footprints to just a little bit left of my foot to the part where there's no evidence of a foot at all having been wet. And to me, the idea of wet footprints is a good reminder to us about staying close to the source of the things that inform us, help us thrive. When we look back and we notice that we don't see any wet footprints, we've gotten away from the very things that sustain us and keep us strong through life. That we sometimes need one another to journey with one another through this thing. That this baptism piece is a constant reminder to us. I'm often reminded, I once was visiting with a couple that was already married, and they wanted to do some ritual to celebrate their years of marriage. They didn't ask me to get remarried. They did a vow renewal service. No one ever asked me to get remarried when they're already married. They just do a renewal of their vows. It's kind of how that happens. But it's interesting how the opposite is true around the ritual of baptism. How many times I've had people come out, well, I was baptized when an infant, I was baptized as a youth. I don't really remember it very much, so it might be better if you rebaptized me. I said, but you're already baptized. You've already had that experience. So why don't we just renew the very vows that are a part of your life? Become who you already are. Let's celebrate that. Rather than going through a ritual, I think God had something to do in that moment. It wasn't all you at baptism. I remember, at least I recall, that the whole idea of a sacrament, it's a meeting ground between God and humanity. God did something significant at that baptism. Whether you remember it or not, whether you claim it as valid or not, it was a significant moment in your life. And you need to claim that and renew that in some way. So the psalm is this invitation to think, where am I planted? Am I planted close to the things that will nurture me in my life? And goodness, we will need over the next year a firm planting near a source that's life-giving. My guess is we will encounter a year of all kinds of hardship and tragedy and marginalization and difficulty. And we can either kind of sequester ourselves away and wonder, how in the world am I supposed to survive in this context? Or do I root myself in the very things I know that will sustain me? Rituals and light and people and presence and depth of being. Putting all those pieces in my life. There was a woman that came to me once in my office, and she said, my faith is in a horrible place, and I need help getting it back. And she felt like something was broken. She goes, I don't know if I believe in God anymore. I'm just not sure where I am anymore. So we went through a ritual went through 2 or 3 sessions together. And as we talked with one another, I had her list out all the things that she felt were things that were important in her life in terms of her faith. Things that historically were things that she did that helped her in her life. And she made a list of about 15, 20 things. I said, how many of those things are you currently doing right now? And she said, not a one. Well, it seems like to me, not that I'm meant to be an answer giver, but it seems like the void is you've got some resources ready at hand. You're just refusing to engage them and help you find strength in your life. So this journey we're on, this faith journey we're on, we need one another. We need to encourage one another. We need to keep rooted in the things that hold us close to one another. When we leave this threshold on a Sunday morning, not that it all happens in this space. I don't want to make the illusion that everything good happens on this side of the threshold of the sanctuary doors. But my hope is the things we encounter in this space, when we leave the threshold out into the world, that we have remembrances of the very things that we need most in our life. We have the very things that are going to deepen the context of our life. We're going to need that stuff. As that one author said, become who you are in Jesus Christ. Claim the very identity that God already knows is in you. You have all the abilities already there. Like, well, I don't know if I have that many. You have all that you need to be you. When you were created, there was no one else in the world created anything like you. You were the only person that's ever walked this planet that's just like you. Of the billions and billions of people that have walked this planet, you are the only one that has that particular thumbprint or fingerprint or mind or ability or gift. God already knows the potential in you. You simply just need to become who you are.